Hello and welcome to the Chess Pit, the live stream where three guys talk about the Chess World Championship. I'm John Mackenzie and I'm joined as always by my good friend Phil Makepeace.
Good evening.
And my other good friend Robin Sarfas.
Good evening, Phil and John.
It's nice to have
be
you
here.
on. Yeah. It's you've been trapped in Nottinghamshire in the snow, so we missed you over the weekend, but we've got you back now so we can have a bumper edition of all of your takes that we've missed for the last three games. So
just in time for the rest day. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Timed that one nicely.
So Robin, you've got lots of takes about chess in general. You said to me before that you should change the colours of the pieces. You think that's a terrible rule that they're black and white. But let's talk about the Chess World Championship. How much have you managed to catch of it, and have you enjoyed it so far?
Yes, so I followed games 1 and 2 very closely. I was less able to do so on Sunday for game 3, just because of travelling and stuff. It was, in case anyone had noticed, there was a bit of weather going on and stuff. So I was sort of traipsing through the snow to different train stations. It was very cold and stuff. But yeah, so I've seen. I was following games 1 and 2 very closely. And I've since looked at game 3 and looked at a couple of recaps. I've watched all of your delightful coverage so far. So I'm pretty au fait with them, and I've enjoyed it so far. I must say. I think particularly game 2 was very exciting. It was a bit It was a bit end to end.
Like a game of basketball.
Yeah, well, I play the Catalan anyway. Obviously, not quite as well as those two, but I play it from the white side. So that was quite enjoyable for me to actually to sort of see what the kind of the top novelties are going to be and things like that. And yeah, that was a pretty gripping game. I thought. I guess there's sort of been loads of sort of narratives around draws and is there going to all this X, Y, and Z, which I guess we'll sort of cover off.
Yeah, and I guess we're now at this rest day. Phil and I talked a lot on the last stream about like where the players will be at this point. We had a conversation, I think maybe yesterday, about how Nepo will feel about the current state of affairs, and you suggested that that we're now at a point where we can start talking about Nepo maybe having a chance of winning this. So what's your take on where Nepo is right now after three draws into a 14-game match?
Yeah, so I think just from a nerves perspective, he will be very happy to have got through 3 games where it's disabused anyone of the notion, I think, that Magnus is just going to steamroll Nepo, that Nepo's not at the same sort of on the same kind of in the same league as Carlsen, and that it's just going to be a walkover. I think that is kind of we're past the point where you would, I think, conceivably say that. Obviously, that's not to say that Magnus still isn't the favourite, I think, but Nepo will be happy to have actually now just played a few games on that stage, right? It's just like anything. The first time you do it is always the nerviest, like just anyone who's played chess knows, like the first time you actually have to sit over the board and right, just in that situation. So sort of amplifying it times a million by all the cameras and all of the press and press conferences, etc. I think it must be massively nerve-wracking. And Daniel King talked about how nervous Fabi looked in the first game of the 2018 championship, and that was one of Carlsen's best chances to actually win a game. He had a 1 position as black, which he couldn't convert in the time issues. So it's so I think Nepo will be happy with how he's gone so far. He's also probably had the best winning chances of either players during any of the 3 games, I would say. I'd say the only, and you could counteract that by saying it's a bit disappointing that for him that he had such a good position and he didn't manage to convert it on Saturday after Carlsen's quite an accurate 95. But then, at least he's not given Carlsen any similar chances. So, there's sort of positives and drawbacks to both those positions. Ultimately, it's been 3 draws, right? So you can't really take too much away from that.
Yeah, Phil, I'll bring you in on this. What's your general take? I know we've talked a lot in the last 3 days about all of this stuff, but you said yesterday that you haven't changed your mind on anything. So why is it then that you would? I guess I'm interested to sort of pit you and Robin against one another in some sense, because obviously you're still staying like Magnus is the favorite and is going to sort of slowly grind. So what would you say against that, against Robin's take on Nepo in that respect?
I'm not sure it's a case of arguing against Robin. I'm going to keep it kind of civil here. I think that there's
Boo.
Well, there's room for nuance, isn't there? We can say that Nepo's doing very well.
Have you met me?
And that he's showing that he's got more perhaps than we thought he might. But I would suggest that there is or was enough of a gulf between Magnus and Nepo at the beginning, such that we're still okay. Maybe at the beginning, my thoughts were like here for Magnus versus Nepo, and maybe I think Magnus hasn't really done anything particularly wrong, so I'd keep him here, and maybe Nepo's gone up a bit, but there's still a little bit of a gap, and it's just I think it's inevitable at some point that Magnus will just find a position which suits him and grind it out and keep grinding and grinding until he gets that win. We also have to consider, of course, as well, that if it does go to 14 draws, that Magnus, in theory, will have, again, that advantage at Rapid. So I in terms of, I'm not less confident of my pick, but I will give Nepo credit for having done slightly better than I thought he might. Let's put it that way.
Can I push you on what you said about Magnus isn't getting the sorts of positions that he does well in? Because I think there's an interesting tactical thing that's going on there. Because I feel as though with Magnus, what we're seeing him do is trying to take the initiative in ways that he doesn't usually do when he's playing slow chess. And we've talked a little bit in previous streams about how it's almost as though he feels the impetus to go out and prove that he can win this in the slow play classical games. And so I guess my question to you guys is, do we think that Magnus is sort of putting himself out of his comfort zone? And Phil, as you're suggesting there, if there are positions that he will feel more confident in, is it now going to shift that way in the match? Are we now going to see Magnus trying to get into those sorts of positions and grind that way?
Well, perhaps in game one, if Nepo, I think we were all impressed, and I think the world was impressed at how well prepared Nepo was against this particular sideline, and how knight a5 would have been a Magnus-like position had Nepo not already known what to do up to move 15 or whatever it was. So I don't think it's necessarily the games themselves that haven't necessarily been suited.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, Nepo pulled King F1 out like really quickly, and that is just not a move that you would, and I mean maybe you would spot it given a lot of time and stuff like that, but he knew that was the right move and played it very quickly, and I think that's sort of as impressive, I think, as Carlsen having this knight a5 move in the first place. I think. Because he had obviously gone that, I think, probably with an idea that maybe he would manage to get the initiative to a greater extent than he did. Sorry to interrupt, Phil.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's more that I think Magnus is maybe trying slightly too hard to land these. Well, maybe not too hard, but like he's clearly trying very hard to land these opening surprises. And inevitably, because they're not necessarily objectively best, they aren't landing as much as they might if they were clearly better novelties, as opposed to kind of offbeat novelties.
Yeah, I think that where Phil and I differ perhaps is that we're probably maybe still the same distance apart from where we were in the first instance. It's just that I was sort of quite bullish about Nepo's chances. I sort of begrudgingly picked Magnus when we did the preview episode and made our predictions, but part of me did want to go for Nepo, whereas Phil was far more in the camp of like, I think there's going to be decisive games early on. I think that this might not go to 14 games, etc. And so if both of us have perhaps shifted towards Nepo, we're not further away from each other that we are. It's just that now I've crossed the sort of the threshold into it. And for me, I'm not saying that I think Nepo it should be favoured now when I say that I am predicting that he's going to win. And we've sort of buried the lead here. This is the first time I'm actually saying it in front of anyone, in front of you guys, or in front of sort of an actual audience. But I'm predicting that Nepo will win now. But I don't necessarily have a lot to sort of prove why that's going to be the case. Although I would push back on the idea that Magnus hasn't done anything wrong yet. Like, I think he clearly misplayed the position on Saturday, and you could, he obviously had the initiative at that stage. If he finds the right move, he doesn't play this knight e5. If he doesn't overlook Nepo's knight c5, then he's going to have a very good position. But he did overlook that, and that was a pretty big thing. I think and then also to swap off the extra pair of minor pieces as he was giving up the exchange. I think was, well, again, a computer would tell you that that's a mistake, and that Nepo could have had a very sort of good winning chances from that. Obviously, that's very easy for us to say, having looked at it with a computer evaluation. But still, I mean, to say that he's done nothing wrong, well, that's not completely true, is it?
I mean, if you're bullish about Nepo, does that make me bearish? Is that where we're going with this? We've got the markets going here.
It's the chess pit menagerie.
Yeah, I think all this is very interesting. I think one thing that I would like us to maybe talk about a little bit is the conversation that's been happening around draws. And I saw that Anish Giri had tweeted something about how every time there's a short draw in a World Championship game, people start questioning whether or not chess is dead. I wrote a little bit about this in my newsletter today. About the sort of concept of the draw. How do we feel about the draw? Phil and I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but Robin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, people talk about draws as though we should be surprised that there's going to be a lot of draws, right? The last World Championship had all draws in the slow play elements. The one before that, I think there was only a couple of games where there was decisive victories. Yeah, and so like we're talking a format which does breed draws. So 3 draws in a 14-game match, I don't think should be too surprising for us. But what's your general take? Because I feel as though people have stepped too far from draws are a problem to therefore we need to do everything we can to avoid them, to actually missing the point of why draws are quite a regular occurrence in these sorts of formats.
Yeah, I think that there's draws and there's draws, right? I think the first thing to do is perhaps to separate game 3 from game 1 and 2. I think if every one of the 14 games took the sort of form of the play in game 3, I think that would be a problem. I think because there were just neither side had any chances really to push for anything. It was played out very quickly. And both, if all 14 games had like that, then I would kind of argue what's the point, because they're just gone into sort of a sort of something that's like theoretically extremely drawish, and yeah, it's the chess has to be. I think that there has to be entertainment coming from this in order for it to be worth doing. And I'm not saying that entertainment means it needs to be we need to do stuff to eradicate draws, because I don't think that the draw precludes the entertainment vis-a-vis games 1 and 2, right? If every game was a draw, but it had the same sort of nip and tuck action of game 2, on the other hand, then I would think there's absolutely no issue. So I think partly we need to differentiate between the final result of the game and the manner in which it is reached. I think that's the fundamental issue here. So I think, yeah, people, it's pretty early days as well to be getting on that. I mean, Magnus is the favourite, and he's only had one position as white. He did manage to stir up some trouble, sort of for better or for worse, with his first white. And I think that we might be likely to see him sort of be a bit more flexible in what he plays as well. So I think he'll be looking to catch Nepo off guard again, as he did on Saturday. But in more general terms, I think, I mean, what do you want at this point? Ultimately, there's only so much you can do to sort of stop draws. These haven't been like sort of Berlin repetition draws after, on move 18 or 19 or wherever it is. This has been they're trying.
Yeah, there's a massive difference between a 4-4 in football and 0-0. Right? I mean, it's the same result. Yeah, everyone's getting a point. Yeah.
I guess maybe to push you on this, like, do we think that because Carlson has come out and been quite aggressive, unlike himself in that respect. And Nepo's been, to a certain extent, happy to just take draws out of complex positions. Is it simply the case that Nepo will have come into this match and thought, get through the first few games at parity, and then we can start doing interesting stuff? Do we think that we'll start seeing more interesting stuff from Nepo as the game goes on? Because it feels to me, and maybe I'm just misreading it, but it feels to me that Nepo has been a more defensive player than Magnus in these games so far.
I think that I think just to describe Carlson's play purely as aggressive and Nepo's as defensive, I think is not a very nuanced way of describing it. I think because so obviously in his games as particularly, let's talk about the first game, I guess, as Black, right, when Magnus brought out this knight a5, gave up a pawn for the bishop pair and for sort of lead and development, etc. Now, he's obviously the line here is towards the Marshall Gambit. Or the martial attack, or whatever you want to call it, which Nepo is avoiding through his play, right? But in that, just because it's you give up a pawn for some initiative, doesn't mean that you're trying to necessarily do that because you think that's aggressive and is going to be more likely that you'll win. I think the marshal itself is seen as a very sort of reasonably reliable drawing weapon for Black, just because the point is you give up that pawn, you get some initiative. You make it difficult for White to play, and then later on at some point, that initiative might be converted into you just winning that pawn back, and then it peters out to a draw. It's not necessarily Magnus saying that I'm going to give up this pawn here for some massive attack where I'm going to actually checkmate White. So I think that chess is a game of imbalances, and giving up a bit of material early on for some initiative doesn't necessarily mean that you're just sort of basically saying it's checkmate or nothing here. He's not he's not playing like the Stafford Gambit or some sort of ridiculous kind of stupid here. Ultimately, playing as Black, right, you are fighting for equality really out of the opening, and the method that you want to do that, whether or not that's giving up, you're going to have to give some quarter to White in the hope that you're going to gain something which you're going to then use to outplay them slightly, and then potentially, obviously, you could get a win out of that. But the Berlin has a very drawish reputation, but Kramnik used to win with it all the time with his king e1, king e8, and king d8. Sorry,
Robin, I just want to ask: are you trying to get in and shoehorn in as many band names as possible? So far, we've had Massive Attack, Berlin, Suede, Dodgy, and I think there's one more as well. All these 90s bands.
Well, yeah, I think I think I will retract from saying that Nepo is engaging in cold play at the moment, and what's your take on this, Phil? Do you feel as though we're going to see, I mean, regardless of whether or not we want to talk about attacking and defensive and maybe over egging the pudding on that, we are seeing, and the narrative has been, we are seeing different Magnus to what we're used to, and we're seeing a different Nepo to what we're used to, right?
So what's the question?
Just a sort of continuation of what we were talking about there. That are we seeing Nepo be maybe a little bit more circumspect than he might be normally, and are we going to see that? Are we going to see that flip around later on in the match?
I think that what we're seeing is largely the game plan that they've prepared. That doesn't mean it's less Nepo-ish or Magnus-ish than we're used to.
Napoleonic, I think, is the word, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. What we have to remember is that this is match play, and that is completely different from any tournament play that you're going to get. This is as I said, we're not even a quarter of the way through. That means that realistically, yeah, I mean, in a tournament, you're not going to have more than 2 games against the same, maybe 4 in the World Cup or something. But yeah, normally you're getting maybe 1 game with each colour, and that's it. Here, again, I'm going to do the same thing I've done every day so far and cop out of it and just say it's really too early to tell. And it is, because we're nowhere near this point of really knowing everything about what's going on.
I mean, it looks like Nepo's games with White are so far. You can extrapolate some sort of pattern there that Magnus is going to play e5 and go for these martial type positions against the Spanish. Now, it doesn't look like he's going to get a lot there, to be honest. So I think that's one thought here, is that we might be looking for, if Nepo doesn't change tack, then we might be looking at the variability being in Magnus's whites, and that would obviously you would say favor Magnus, because he's obviously going to have a better chance of, he's got more chance of winning with white than he does of losing with white. Put it that way. I think I do agree with Phil. It's a bit too early to say, just because we don't. I think we need to, in terms of the sort of the opening play, we just need to have a bit more of a sample size to be kind of sure what the texture of the match is going to be going forwards. I think that everyone always says Magnus is comfortable playing basically anything. His repertoire is just so varied, so that, you know, if that's what the situation is going to be in this match, then that might be a strong benefit to him. I don't know. It's hard to say, because this is the most prepared, most elite level of chess, and so the higher you get, the less likely you are that Nepo's going to do what you would think of as the kind of Nepo style of thing, of just go for some sort of like outlandish kind of attack, because obviously those things work because your opponent struggles to refute them over the board, because you give them so much chance to go wrong. But obviously with this time control and with this level of preparation, that's just so much less likely. Like, we're not going to see them get sort of a Magnus going to a Najdorf and then Nepo play like Rook G2, Rook G1 on sort of a as he did in the game that was one of the games that I saw in one of the previews, right? Like he's going to have to play stuff that, you know, even if he wants an attacking position, he still has to play good moves, and those good moves, Magnus is likely to be pretty well prepared against them. So I'm looking forward to game 4. Nakamura was on the chess.com stream the other day saying that these next few games, sort of the next 3 games, Magnus has got 2 whites, and I think we'll know a lot more after that.
Yeah, Magnus has got 2 rest days going into them as well, both tomorrow and Friday. So he's got a big advantage there, you'd think.
Yeah.
Could we talk a little bit about the strategy? Because I guess for people who don't follow this kind of game, this kind of match normally, there are questions to be raised about how you would approach this as a sort of strategic gambit to win the match. So in terms of what are the games that you're targeting as, I guess, as black and white starting off with, or as challenger and current holder? Like, what are the games that you're looking at and thinking, right, these are the games where we can do something different in? Do you go into those first few games and think, right, whack out the novelties here? When do you play what you think is going to be your strongest game? Where do you place those things, Phil?
Having never played a match, I've no idea. I could guess at. I mean, getting the first psychological blow in is probably quite big, because it might reveal how prepped you are, and then you want to give the other players' team something to think about overnight. Make them work harder, because if they're going, well, we're underprepared, then you're in big trouble, because you're going to know that, and then you might start second guess. I'm just thinking the context here is the Karpov-Korchnoi matches, where Korchnoi was woefully underprepared because Ray Keane was mainly writing a book about the match during it instead of being his second. This is well documented. He had agreed not to write a book, and Karpov was unable to take advantage of Korchnoi's lack of preparedness from his team at that point. I think that Carlsen.
I think
Carlsen will be definitely looking to get in I think these rest days with white following is a huge opportunity for him to go in completely fresh and really load up on games 4 and 6, as we said.
I think it does depend on where those, hypothetically imagining say that Magnus has got some sort of novelty up his sleeve. I think it really depends on where it is. because it's unlikely that if he's got anything sort of in his pocket, as anything sort of like bigger in his pocket as with the black pieces in this Marshall stuff, that he's not going to sort of go for it sooner rather than later, because obviously the longer that their games are played in that line, the more that Nepo's team are going to be looking at that, preparing him for that, and the more likely they are to sort of find it and before you can use it, kind of thing. But obviously if Magnus has something big in, I don't know, the has something big against something with the white side, right? Like he might, if he might drop e4 in or c4 in at some point, right? If he's got something tucked obviously there, then maybe he would want to use that for later on in the game, where perhaps the game's obviously, proportionally speaking, each one takes on greater significance as the previous ones are drawn. But I think that again they'll have come in with, it's not really like a one game at a time thing here, right? They'll come in with a strategy of like, this is roughly like how we want to play against these things. And stuff. You can't just press the novelty button and it just happens, right? You need to, assume that you need to get a line that you need your opponent to play the moves that you want them to as well to get that in. So I think that they would probably put it this way: if they've got a move that they can play that they think gives them a really good chance of catching their opponent off guard, I think they'll play it. I don't think they'll be holding on, because they might not get another chance. That's the other thing.
Yeah,
I
guess
agree.
the other aspect as well is that people talk about Nepo and his lack of stamina, which again is like, it's anecdotal, but would that necessarily convince Magnus to maybe save some of these bigger things for later on in the match if it goes the distance?
Yeah, but conversely, would he not want to wear him out more early on?
Yeah, I suppose the ideal is you just have lots of good stuff for every game. Right?
Yeah, again, I just think they'll go in. They'll both go in, and they'll just try and play the best move at every sort of possible moment. I think we can sort of overthink that a little bit too much. It's clear that where we will see the difference is if one player takes a lead, and things. So, like for example, at the moment, it looks like Nepo didn't play towards the Grunfeld with his first black, and if it was the case that he did find himself 1-0 down, maybe he would go there, because that is obviously it's sharper. Not that it's doesn't always end up being one of those Grunfeld draws anyway. But I think that's more likely to change their strategy than some desire to thinking that getting winning chances at a later point is going to be more valuable than early on.
There's also a thing where playing a long ending, if you have this little tiny nibble you're trying to make someone suffer over several hours, that is likely to be more effective if there's not a rest day immediately afterwards. You're then kind of doing it, you're investing the time in trying to just make the most of being annoying for a long time in an end game, even if it looks like being an inevitable draw. Then you're kind of investing, hoping that they're going to be tired for the following day as well.
Yeah, just got Benji in the chat saying if he's 1-0 down, he can play the Grunfeld and then be 2-0 down. So yeah, that's what Benji thinks of the Grunfeld.
Like the breakaway attack. Yeah.
Benji plays the Stonewall Dutch, so I won't have any of that.
Another thing that would be good for us to talk about, I think, especially with beginners listening in, is this notion of like replaying the same openings. That could be something that maybe is a little bit confusing to first-time watchers of the game. So, Phil, why is it that they'll do that? Why is it that they'll be happy to sort of try different lines out in the same opening?
It's just, looking for match play is all about finding the little nuances, the tiny differences that will exist over several games. You'll get little deviations. So we've already had that in game 1 and 3, where Black played largely the same opening, but was met with a slightly different 8th move, which didn't allow what Magnus had tried on Friday.
It's A4 versus H3, I think.
Yeah. So the idea there is that you are just building. Basically, you get this narrative of the match overall, but then you get a narrative of the match that's split into 2 as well. So you'll get someone's white openings and someone's black openings, that they're just constantly tweaking and finding the right kind of balance based on what their opponents played. Sometimes what will happen is that it will go horribly For example, I'm thinking of the Grunfeld, where Kasparov tried it against Kramnik in the 2000s, lost horribly, and then didn't play it for the rest of the match. And that was basically the match. Kramnik just had a massive psychological plus there that Kasparov wouldn't use his main weapon against D4 against him because it went so badly. If we see Magnus abandoning E5, that will either be because he's already lost or because he really doesn't feel like he can get much out of it.
Let's talk about the next 2 games then, because we've obviously got a rest day today, 2 games, and then another rest day. How will the 2 players be looking at these 2 games in isolation? Will they be treating them as a sort of mini series in that sense? And do you think that we'll learn anything from that, or is it just too small a sample size?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, we said that Magnus should really be looking to go into tomorrow when he has white with big ideas of at least making Nepo sweat. That may well then be a case of, if he's made Nepo sweat, he then may be able to, as I said, invest that energy into Wednesday's game with Black, where he can just maybe do something a little bit offbeat again, try and test Nepo's stamina in that way, not just on the day itself, but day to day. If it doesn't go so well tomorrow for Magnus, I suspect he'll just look to carve out quite quickly on Wednesday with Black and go again with this thing of having the rest day followed by a white game on Friday. So if it goes well tomorrow, I think Magnus will attack it on Wednesday. Obviously, he would need to attack it if he wins tomorrow. He'd then be in a position where he could halve out for the rest of the event. But if he, as I suspect will happen, is get a little plus but not quite manage to eke out the ending tomorrow, that's my prediction, then I think that might pay dividends on Wednesday.
Maybe it's because the tranches of games are coming in sort of alternate 3 and 2 with the rest days interposed between them. Perhaps that it's not necessarily games 4 and 5, but maybe 6, 7, and 8, where Magnus has 2 white games, sandwiching the 1 white for Nepo in that, and that maybe is a chance to really stress out Nepo's stamina, defending some of those unpleasant, slightly passive end games that Magnus just loves to bully people with. If he could sort of cause problems on Friday and then do the same on Sunday, then that's going to be perhaps where Nepo's going to find himself in a bit of danger. The reverse Oreo from Benji.
Yeah. I think we're drawing to a close now. So unless you've got anything else you want to talk about between you, I think it might be good to just do predictions in terms of opening. So what do you think that we'll see from White in the next 2 games? I'll start with you, Robin. What do you think we're going to see tomorrow and the day after?
I expect that we will see the Catalan again tomorrow. I wonder if Nepo might step away from this B5 line because it's quite trendy at the moment, but it's not that natural, I think, to play that B5 move. It invites a lot of pressure down that lot, that you just give yourself a lot of problems you need to solve. And I wonder if perhaps he might go for something more solid, maybe with one of the A6 lines.
Yeah, it is a minefield, isn't it? Yeah. I think we'll see 1 E4 tomorrow from Magnus. I think Magnus will jump in with E4 and really go for it.
And then what about the game after, Robin?
I think we might see more of the same. I think we'll get in. I think we'll keep getting Spanish type positions. Yeah, I think that I'm imagining that Gustafsson is involved in Magnus's team and that he's influencing that a lot because he really is an expert in those positions. So I think Nepo just seems to have got so little. Is that given the chance, it just makes sense maybe for Magnus to go there, because I mean, what are his alternatives, right, in the Spanish? Berlin maybe, but again, if it like that's if anything more drawish, I feel like the Marshal's giving perhaps Magnus a bit more initiative. The only other thought is maybe that Nepo would deviate and go for an Italian, but I think I think we'll see another Marshal type position.
So we've seen H3 as an anti-Marshal line. We've seen A4 as an anti-Marshal line. Will we see? Is it D? I guess it's D3 as an anti-Marshal line this time round, or do you think that we could see another one of the ones we've already seen?
You could see 1D4. 1D4 is the ultimate anti-Marshal line, right?
It's true. What's your take, Phil?
I think that if Magnus wins tomorrow, he'll start playing the Berlin and just going hyper solid. If my prediction of draw, but he's got pressure, stands up, I think we might even see a Sicilian on from Magnus. He's gonna have to start taking advantage of the little things more, and just this psychological bent of really trying to put some actual pressure on Nepo. It's going to have to happen at some point.
We've yet to see a really long game and stuff. So I wonder if Magnus has got that in store for Nepo in the next week. Can't wait to find out.
Yeah, it should be good fun, and we will be, as always, covering those games in a debrief after the games. We'll be talking about the big picture stuff, trying not to get too much into the nuts and bolts of the notation, but do join us. Thank you for those people who've listened tonight. It's good to see Benji in the chat, and no doubt we'll see more of him as the match progresses. But thank you both for coming on. Robin, it's great to have you back. We missed you for the first few games, but we'll be seeing a bit more of you. I think you two guys are doing it tomorrow because I'm away at the football, so I'm looking forward to catching up on that when I get back. But thank you both for coming on.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.